1, 2. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to VUX World. Today we have an epically exciting show for you lined up. We've got the whole team of Mycroft, more or less, joining us today, talking about the open source voice development platform and all of the hardware, the smart speakers that they have as well. It's going to be a huge, interesting episode. We also have a new feature on the show, which is called Dev Chops with Dustin. If any of you are involved in the voice scene, you'll have come across Dustin. Dustin is going to be covering some of the technical aspects and development aspects of the Mycroft platform. And it's going to be epically interesting. It's going to be immense, absolutely. So we have, joining us today, we have Joshua Montgomery, the CEO of Mycroft. We have Steve Penrod, the CTO of Mycroft. And we also have Derick Schweppe, the CDO of Mycroft. What an epic title. And Dustin Coates as well. Ladies and gentlemen, this is VUX World. Okay, that's unfortunately, which is a bit of a downer so far. I went through a whole host of messing around before this, to get all of the audio beamed through to your side, chaps, and it hasn't worked. So it seems well, I'll work it out. It will be fine eventually. But hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us. We'll start off. We'll introduce Dustin. Dustin is going to co-host this episode, and we're also going to try a new feature on VUX World, which is Dev Chops with Dustin. If you are even remotely involved in the scene, you'll have come across Dustin's work, and he is also writing a book at the moment about voice applications for Alexa and Google Assistant. Dustin, hello.
Hey everyone, looking forward to it.
Wicked. And we also have Joshua Montgomery, the CEO of Mycroft. Hello, Joshua.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning. And Steve. Hello, Steve, the CTO of Mycroft.
Hello, everyone.
And last, but you can bet your bottom dollar it is not least, we have Derick, the CDO. Derick, hello.
Hello, VUX World.
Epic title, that. CDO, Chief Design Officer. Is that right?
Yeah. It's great to have that opportunity.
That is a wicked title. I've never come across that one before, but that is definitely one that is interesting.
Mike, God.
Mycroft.
Mycroft. We'll start off. We'll do a few intros beforehand. We'll start with co-host Dustin, and then we'll move along to Josh and Steve and Derick. Just a few. Let's say 30 seconds to a minute. A little bit about your background, just to put it into context for everybody listening. How you kind of got to where you are now. So we'll start with you, Dustin.
Yeah, I am a software engineer by training. And I've been working with voice for a few years now. Started out like most people in the space as a hobbyist, and really started to move on to tie my teaching background as well to start blogging about it, and now writing a book called Voice Applications for Alexa and Google Assistant as well. So really looking to hear more about Mycroft today and see what all you guys have to offer.
Cool. Joshua.
Hello, I'm Joshua Montgomery, the CEO of Mycroft. My last company was a gigabit fiber broadband system, and we wanted to build Jarvis from Iron Man into our facility. And next thing you know, we're running an artificial intelligence startup, building an artificial intelligence for everyone who doesn't want to send all their data to Google and Amazon. And my role at the company is to talk guys like Dustin into changing the title of their books to writing voice applications for Alexa, Google, and Mycroft.
Fantastic. Steve?
Hey, good morning. So I'm one of those graybeard developers now, as I'm becoming. I've been in the programming world since the late 80s, early 90s, and got involved with voice interaction actually earlier than a lot of people in the very late 90s with the tablet PC and the early speech API while I was working at Autodesk and doing development on mobile platforms. And so I was playing with voice then, although it just wasn't ready for prime time. And have moved in the last few years, revisited the area around 2014 and discovered that it is a ready for prime time technology now, and excited to be able to bring it to the world and see what we can do, find out the new paradigms and the new capabilities that we can add to computing with voice.
Cool. And Derek?
Hi, so my background is in industrial design, and I worked on all kinds of stuff from aircraft interiors to consumer electronics and housewares. But I'd always say that my principles were in user-centered design. So recently been transitioning to UX as a whole for Mycroft, but I get to keep dabbling with industrial design as well. Too. But so this VUX, VUI business is relatively new to me, but I've jumped in and kind of absorbed as much as possible.
Cool. That'd be interesting to get into what you've kind of learned and what your kind of first impressions and all that sort of stuff have been. Just, what's some of the things that just getting into that, and we'll kind of, I know we're diversing already, but what are some of the things that are straight away, that if it's new to you, what are some of the things that have either surprised you or kind of, been a bit of a surprise?
Actually, I think one of the most surprising things is how long really the field of voice user interface design has been around in things like IVR and what Steve was mentioning earlier, some of the earlier stuff, and how much those principles still do apply, but also how different they have evolved with natural language and capable systems. But a lot of the principles are pretty applicable. So seeing the resources out there, and there are so many growing resources in terms of books and guides and things like that for VUX and VUI designers, that it's really great to jump in and learn nowadays.
Cool. So for a lot of people who've been listening to this, or the feedback that we've had so far, are people who are within the sort of voice space and who are, working on developing voice apps and voice experiences for whether it's Alexa or Google Home or something like that. Some may have heard of Mycroft. I'm certainly hoping they have done, but also there's people who are listening to this who aren't really aware of the voice scene in general, really, and they're kind of just starting to get into it. So for those people, Josh, we'll turn to you. For those people who haven't heard of Mycroft before, what is Mycroft?
So Mycroft is an open alternative to Alexa and Google Home. The idea for us was to build a platform that allowed and encouraged developers and users to build a voice user experience that is unique to them. Really, the synthesis of the project was, we wanted to build a voice assistant in a space that we owned. We wanted to be able to walk in and tell it, play video on this screen, or turn the lights on, or whatever actions. And this is before Google Home and before Echo was a thing. And we went looking at the existing voice AI stacks, which at the time was basically Siri and then a very limited version of Google Assistant. And we found that there was no capability to customize those experiences at all. And so we set out to build something that would allow people to customize the experience, change the wake word, really define and build a user experience that was for them. And by setting up an open source community, we began to build a piece of tech that really was extensible, really was customizable, and really could run anywhere. Our stated goal as a company is much different from Google and Alexa and Amazon and Apple, in that we are aiming to build an AI that runs anywhere and interacts exactly like a person. At the end of our project, we want the voice assistant we're building to be able to interact with you so naturally that you have difficulty telling whether you're speaking to a human or a machine. And so in addition to the traditional voice experience type features, we're building in conversational features and personality features that allow the users to customize it and extend it to hold complete conversations with the user, which is very, very unique and very different from what our friends at Amazon and Google are doing.
Wow. So what were the timescales involved in Mycroft then? So how did it all come around, from where you first having the idea to getting to where you are now? What kind of timescale are we looking at? When did you first kind of have the idea for Mycroft?
I had the idea in mid 2015. We were all working on Raspberry Pi and had a microphone and a speaker on our desk, along with a wall wart, a big, huge bundle of Medusa cables. Like, it was a big mess. And, my office in Lawrence is also a makerspace. So in addition to office space, we have laser cutters, 3D printers, wood shop, metal shop, PCB fabrication. And I looked at that mess one day and decided, hey, this is a disaster, and went back in the back and synthesized a little, basically oversized hockey puck enclosure for it, and set it on my desk, and then started scratching my head and said, I wonder if anybody wants to buy this. So, at the time, we were mentoring a lot of other young entrepreneurs who kept coming to us and being like, I want to take this idea to Kickstarter. And we'd never done that, right? So we decided to take this hockey puck idea to Kickstarter as an exercise. Like, this is how you run a Kickstarter. And we went and recruited Derick, who had a very successful Kickstarter previously, and ended up running the largest Kickstarter to ever come out of the state of Kansas. And from there, we were contacted by Techstars, and Techstars led to Sean Fitzgerald. Sean was the first developer at Siri, second engineer assigned to Echo over at Amazon, started raising money, took some money from Jaguar Land Rover and began doing integrations with the F-Type sports car, and then have continued down that path with investments from other big corporates like Shure Microphones, as well as a variety of proof of concept projects in actually a variety of industries, everything from conference room systems to consumer printers to automotive. There's a really broad interest in voice, and that's really driving our project and our company forward.
Wow. So, Steve and Derick, what drew you both to Mycroft then? What was it about Mycroft that kind of, made it interesting for you and made you want to kind of get involved? We'll start with you, Derick.
Sure. So, yeah, like Josh said, we got in contact, and it's actually interesting. It's through my grandfather, who founded the computer science program at the University of Kansas. He was a customer of Josh's. And so he told me about this project, and I was like, oh yeah, I'll go talk to them. And I'd done a Kickstarter before. And so when I saw it, I was like, okay, this is going to be either nothing or really big, because you're talking about, okay, I'd known about Echo. It was still in beta at the time. These things, it's on the cusp. This is what I want. I wanted to be involved in technology like this, and who doesn't want to build a talking robot, right? So at that point in time, it was Kickstarter, it was industrial design, it was, that kind of conversation. And then I just kind of basically hung around and said, hey, you need design for a lot of other things too. So it just kind of grew from there.
Cool. And the design part is obviously a huge part. It's I've seen a tweet from I think it was Smartly.ai that was mentioning that 90% of time and effort should be spent on the design side, and the development side is not the easy bit, but the harder part is actually getting the design right. And I've seen the video of you on YouTube with the Jaguar, and that looks pretty cool inside there. So what drew you to Mycroft then?
Well, like I said, I kind of got started in this whole voice, this whole voice world a long time ago. And then 2014 is when I started building out my own kind of voice agent. I had left a previous company, and I was building that as a technology, see where I could go with it. And at that time, nobody else was publicly doing anything. So I kept waiting and waiting. I knew that it was too good an idea. It's just one of those things that felt like it was ready for a bunch of people to jump in. And finally Amazon came out with their device about a year into my development. And so I was spending some time trying to figure out how to partner, because at that point it was largely just me doing this, and I knew there was no way I would be able to take on a larger development team and grow it fast enough, because I knew this, once it took off, it's going to be a big consumer world product, and it's not something that I wanted to take on the hardware manufacturing specifically. So I was actually talking to some people at Google about it, and the guy I was talking to said, do you know Josh Montgomery, have you ever heard of these guys in Lawrence? And I said, no, because I was in Kansas City, which is 20 minutes away. It's like, you guys should meet each other. And so that was kind of when things kicked off for us, and decided to merge our efforts. I think the open source approach is really the best approach for what we're trying to build right here. This is a very base technology. These kinds of base technologies need to have a lot of eyes involved with them, and a lot of people bringing in their ideas and their concepts, and being able to vet the technologies to make sure that what we're doing is the right thing. And the privacy implications of this are so important, so much different than interacting with even your phone, which is a very private object. But this always listening aspect of a voice assistant, it's borderline creepy. And you gotta be aware of that and figure out how can we make it acceptable to people, where they're willing to trust what you're doing is in their best interest, not just the interest of whoever sold you the device.
So what kind of things do Mycroft do then that might be different to the other brands out there, the big two we obviously know of, to address those kind of privacy concerns that you just mentioned? Is there anything in particular that you're trying to focus on?
Yeah. There's a couple of things that are an issue with the existing stacks that we resolve. So one of them is the limited functionality that you get with technologies from the other players. There's only so many things they'll let you do. They have to approve any skills before they get deployed on the platform. They've limited what functions you can and cannot perform. Skill discovery is still a huge issue. You can't build a skill and become the default weather skill for Alexa, for example. In our case, the users have complete control of the stack all the way down to the operating system level. They can do things on the local network. They can get push requests. They can install skills that do basically anything that the computer can do. And so from a flexibility standpoint, it's really, really different from the other stacks. The other thing that's very different is with ours, you can run it completely offline. And so, the speech to text, the speech synthesis, all of the various different components of the stack can be deployed for a larger company inside their corporate perimeter. And when we do our production release next year, we're aiming to provide those services on the local LAN. And what that means is that users don't have to send their data anywhere. They can keep it local and not have to worry about mentioning handcuffs in the kitchen and ending up with a bunch of ads for BDSM gear the next time they get on the internet.
Wicked. That sounds good. So, you mentioned that was it a conscious effort then from the very beginning to make this whole thing open source and completely open? Was that like a real conscious decision, or was it something that just manifested itself?
Yeah, it was a conscious decision. We looked at what everybody was doing, and when you look at the history of computing, every time there's been a significant shift in the HMI, there's been an open player that has been a big winner. When we went from mainframe to x86, Red Hat became the winner. When we went from static to dynamic, WordPress became the winner. When we went from desktop to mobile, Android became the winner, even though it did get scooped up by one of the big corporates. In the relational database space, MySQL, despite Oracle's attempts to kill it multiple times over the last 10 years, is still 25% of the relational database market. And so when you look at this giant shift that the technology is making from basically a caveman interface, with the GUI, you point at something and you grunt. I mean, that is effectively what the GUI is. To a new interface where you can actually hold a conversation with the computer, we feel that there's room for an open alternative, and that opportunity is actually much, much, much bigger than people probably think.
And Joshua, when you speak with these companies and you have this open source solution, what are their thoughts on that? Do they have concerns about it being open source and being available to their competitors as well?
So big corporate thinking on open source has changed dramatically over the last 20 years. 20 years ago in the late 90s, if you'd have gone to a corporate IT manager and said, use this open source product, you would have got a lot of pushback. Well, we can't get support. Well, how do we know it's secure? And fast forward 20 years, and open source software underpins a majority of the technologies we use every day. I mean, almost every server globally is running some form of open source software, either at the basic level, managing the virtual machines, on the virtual machines, running open source services. It's, open software has become a critical part of global infrastructure. And so unlike 20 years ago, where it might have been a disadvantage, today it's an advantage. Companies love the idea of it's open source. We have complete access to it. We can do security audits. There's an active dynamic community that's doing updates to the software, and we benefit from the R&D efforts that other potential competitors might be making in the space. Where we actually find pushback is on technologies like Alexa and Google, where companies look at the Amazon Alexa stack and they say Amazon was selling books 20 years ago. Now they sell space launch services, right? My thesis, Jeff Bezos' thesis is the everything store. He wants you to be able to buy everything, anything on Amazon. His mission statement is to build the world's most consumer-centric company where you can find and purchase anything online. If you're in business, you're probably going to compete with Amazon someday, whether you're a guy who mounts TVs in an office or somebody who's selling retail goods. And so companies are very, very wary about sending their data to Amazon because they have a habit of providing services for an industry that they're targeting, learning about how that industry works by mining the data flowing through their systems, and then launching competing services at subsidized prices and putting them out of business. Diapers.com is a great example. The company Nucleus, which was a voice company. Amazon actually made an investment in Nucleus, which developed a video-enabled Alexa device, and then 8 months later launched a competing product and effectively put them out of business. And this is a company they invested in, right? And so we get a ton of pushback from corporates who are desperately looking to deploy a voice strategy and don't want to use Amazon and Google, which is why if you're writing a book about how to build voice interfaces, you should include a chapter on how to make Mycroft work.
So you won't be entertaining any investment or buyouts from Amazon then?
No, when you read the history of Amazon, I mean, between the way that they've treated the publishing industry, the way they treat their employees, the way that they treat the vendors that are selling things on their website, in my mind, you would be absolutely insane to engage with Amazon at any level ever. Like, I mean, really, if you're a supplier, I've heard Amazon described as a charity run for the benefit of their customers at the expense of their suppliers and investors. And it's very, very true. And, as an Amazon customer, like buying a product from them, I'm totally fine with that. Like rob the other guy and pass the savings on to me, but I'm never going to be a supplier or an employee of Amazon.
That's very well put. That's a few very interesting observations. I'd never actually thought about that angle of it, because obviously they're trying to push the Amazon for business side of things as well. And I've never actually thought about the whole, the more sort of sinister side of it. That's some really interesting observations there. So if we step back slightly, you mentioned that one of the things about being open source is that it's entirely open, obviously, and all of those open source platforms that you kind of mentioned all have a very vibrant kind of community, don't they? A lot of people that contribute to it. You mentioned WordPress. I mean, WordPress, if you ever have a problem with a WordPress website, there's always somebody out there who's fixed it, and you can go and speak to them and figure out how they've done it, kind of thing. So you mentioned when we very briefly spoke on the phone a few weeks back that you've got a very vibrant community. I'm wondering whether we can just kind of touch on the community and chat a little bit about, what kind of stuff's going on there, what kind of things people are building in there and all that kind of stuff.
Sure. I'll let Steve unmute his microphone and kind of address the community aspects. He spends a lot more time working with them than I do. Steve?
Yeah. So we've got actively working in the core, we've had over about, I have to look at the exact stats, but I think around 70 or 80 different contributors that are active on the core itself. And that includes everything from developing the core logic to people who are doing translations on this into, even though we don't officially support other languages quite yet, we've already got translations going on in Italian and Portuguese and French and Dutch and German, and I think somebody started Hindi. And so we've got that at the very core level, and then built into Mycroft is the concept of skills, where you can independently of the core develop a skill that then runs on top of that. And that is the trickiest part for us to measure, because we don't necessarily even know who's doing skill development. We'll have people who pop up who are like, yeah, the last 3 months I've been doing this. And, anyone interested in seeing it? And they've been spending, obviously tons of time creating these. So, probably the best gauge we have on that is just the people who jump into our chat community, the chat.mycroft AI. I think we moved over from Slack to Mattermost last fall. And so we reset the numbers to 0 when we did that. And I think we're over 800 people that are in that community right now that jumped into chats in the last 6 months. So pretty fresh numbers there. So depending, like I said, it's tough for us to measure completely the interaction, but there are a lot of people that are paying attention to what we're doing. And, we can see when we put a comment out on our chat, our website traffic will spike. So we know that there's a lot more listening than talking.
And Derick, you mentioned that there, Steve, that there's a lot of people doing a lot of stuff. From a design perspective, Derick, what kind of things are exciting you about some of the stuff that other people are doing from what you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, I think Josh was talking earlier about how we're really trying to open up a lot of the skills, even on like kind of default skills, the ones that Amazon and Google very kind of closely control. So we have a community member that made a shopping list skill recently that works really quite well, and that may basically become in the short term almost our default skill for that. And that's we've been talking about how valuable that type of deep level contribution is going to be. And there won't be like areas that we close off like you might see from some other voice assistants. And I will admit that we are a little bit lacking in our design guidelines at this time, but we're building. That's one of our big goals for 2018. We're starting to build out. Kathy, our community manager, and excuse me, she's put together a system for recommendations for skills that we're starting to collect and get people to start brainstorming on ideas. And that's really where I want to start getting the design community built up and plugged in and kind of connecting the developers and the designers to go off and kind of work on stuff together and come back to us and say, hey, look at what we did.
And we're also starting to build tools that facilitate contributions from people who might not be developers. And so, one of the things that inherently limits the size of an open source community, especially one who's working on complex problems like speech recognition, natural language understanding, intent parsing, speech synthesis, is that a lot of people don't have the requisite skills to program in Python or C or Java or any of the other technologies that we use. So we've been developing tools that are more similar to Wikimedia Editor, things that allow our community to contribute even though they might not be software developers. The first one that we've deployed is called Precise. And what Precise does is for users who've explicitly opted in, and in our case, if we're going to collect data on a user, they have to actually tell us, I want you to collect the data and have it to improve the technology. Otherwise, we keep nothing. So for users that contribute their utterances, we're picking up the 2 seconds that surround the wake word. So when somebody says, hey, Mycroft, we collect, there's the device on my desk went off. We collect the 2 seconds previous to that, and we feed it to Precise, and then our community comes in and basically says, was this Hey Mycroft, or was this somebody who said I like Minecraft or Go Microsoft, right? And they tag them one or the other, and we feed that into the machine learning engine, and it improves the technology over time. We've gone from I think the original version was like 80% accurate to 97 or 98% accurate in its most recent iteration. And we're opening that tool to other wake words shortly. So you'll be able to train for Hey Victoria or Hey Pedro or any other wake word that you want to use. We're also building a second engine called Persona that takes queries that Mycroft misses and makes them available to the community to answer. So if you ask Mycroft, what's your favorite color? That gets fed to Persona. And based on community input, we might select the favorite color is blue. And as we build a giant library of all of these questions, some of them will be subjective, like what's your favorite color? And some of them will be objective. We're working with the Wikimedia Foundation to make objective data available. So if a user would ask, how tall is Abraham Lincoln? It might punt the first time, not have an answer, right? We do access Wolfram and Wikipedia and others. I think it can't answer that particular question, but as an example, that would get fed into Persona. A community member would look at that and say, oh, Wikidata has all the heights of past US presidents in this table, and they do. And they would link the answer to that query to that table. And that allows the AI not only to answer how tall is Abraham Lincoln, 6'4", but also how tall is George Washington and John Adams and so on and so forth. And the original Persona we're building represents Mycroft, the company, or Mycroft, the technology. And so it's very bland and objective. The goal is to make sure that it represents the most neutral viewpoint possible, in the same way that our friends at Google and Amazon are creating AIs that represent the most neutral viewpoint possible. But in the future, we're going to provide the ability to fork that entire data set. And so if an individual or a community wants to create a Mycroft unit that's favorite color is green, they can collaborate to do that, and to have opinions on politics, and have opinions on sports teams and other topics that the default agent can't have. And so between the ability to contribute by tagging precise queries and the ability to contribute by answering persona questions, we really significantly increase the size of the community that's able to contribute to the stack, because effectively all you need to do is speak the language in order to contribute to the project. And so we're looking at increasing our contributor numbers from the low thousands, probably by a couple of order of magnitudes over the next couple of years.
Wow, that's pretty impressive, that, isn't it? That's probably a good way to solve a problem, actually, rather than employing a load of people to come and try and figure out all these queries and do all the work to respond to them. If you've got people who are passionate about it, which a hell of a lot of people are, or the voice community in general, from what I've seen and experienced over the last kind of few months, everyone is super passionate, and if you can kind of collar a few people who are really, passionate about it and stuff like that, then I think that sounds like a really good idea.
Yeah, I mean, you looked a few years ago and you thought about, hey, let's write an encyclopedia. Let's get people who will help us write an encyclopedia. You say, that's insane. There's no way that's ever going to work. And it kind of did.
That's true, actually, yeah. Classic. So we touched a bit on the hardware there. So the Mark 1's available right now. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. You can go and buy a Mark 1 on our website today.
And the Mark II there's a Kickstarter for that ongoing, the Mark II, is that right?
Yeah, the Kickstarter for the Mark II wraps up on February 24th at 8 a.m., and then we'll transition to Indiegogo for a couple of months. And so, folks who are interested in buying a Mark II, it will never be less expensive than it is right now on Kickstarter. If they're interested, they should reach in and make sure that they reserve one. Cool.
And what's the what are your plans for the Mark II in comparison to the Mark I? So what is kind of different or new, or what is the reason, I suppose, for doing the Mark II?
I'll pass that off to Derick, who's really doing the industrial design in the Mark II. It's going to be a fantastic product.
All right. Yeah, so Mark I, to be honest, when we came in, Josh kind of told you the backstory, but Mark I, it was really designed for Josh, or people like that. You're like, all right, there's a lot of Joshes out there. that are interested in that Mark 1 device. It's very hackable. It's based on the Pi. It's got all those exposed IOs and stuff. But Mark 2 is much more of a play to a mainstream device. But without abandoning completely the ability to do a lot of things for the developers and the makers and hackers as well. So one, to make it more of a mainstream appealing device, we kind of changed the industrial design to be a little bit better suited for maybe instead of your workbench where you're hacking on stuff and your soldering iron to your kitchen counter. And then also to add the screen instead of this kind of lo-fi screen that we had before with the dot matrix and the LEDs, which are fun and cool. But now we've got a full high fidelity screen, so we can do that kind of multimodal stuff that is becoming real popular with voice assistants. So you can see, weather forecasts for a few days, which is better to see on the screen, while you're also getting the verbal feedback. But we're always voice first, so everything that you can do with Mark II, you can do via voice only, but you'll have that screen there for additional context and extra info. And then our other big thing is the sound quality. We're really focusing on improving the sound quality. It's going to have it'll have two speakers in there. It'll have stereo sound. It'll be optimized a lot better than Mark 1 was. And of course, our microphones are going to be exceptional this time. So we're working with Aware, which is a specialist in microphone array technology. And they're helping us make sure that it's going to be as good, if not better, than anything else out on the market. And with that also comes this really interesting piece that we might use in the future, which is this Fpga Fabric that we're possibly going to be able to do a lot of tricky things in hardware that can be done in the future with that platform. Things like right now we'll be doing like the echo cancellation and that type of stuff that makes that better. In the future, it could be all kinds of things. There could be machine learning. There could be even our wake word detection done in that hardware there. So all those things are going to make Mark II a much better product in terms of longevity. It's going to have the ability of, I didn't even mention the camera. Going to have the ability to, last a long time for the customer and be able to, be future-proof to a certain degree. So.
Cool.
And Derick, in the Mark 1 especially, but also in the Mark 2, there's a real personality that you don't see in other voice-first devices. Can you talk a little bit about your decision-making there?
Yeah, for sure. I think, Josh always wanted it to have kind of an anthropomorphic quality. And so the challenge there, and I love that too. I mean, that was one of the things that sold me at the beginning of it, was because I know an echo is just essentially a cylinder, and everybody's kind of gone that approach. And I think the challenge was, okay, can we have a device that has personality? It can have a face. And then with Mark II, we consciously decided, all right, but if you don't want that, what can it be? And so the design for Mark II, we've got the flexibility. It could be that little talking robot that has that kind of cuteness, but if that's not your thing, you can set it up to have like a clock face or to tell you, the weather forecast and things like that. So in both instances, it works. And that was a big challenge, I think, from the design side. But yeah, we didn't want to abandon what Mark 1, that cute robot kind of look. And I think that's something that maybe they're afraid to tackle from some of those other companies, is this idea that, we probably all had growing up, that this technology is going to be personified in some way, maybe more so than just the voice, right? Even all the sci-fi stuff growing up, like, this robot that has a face and has character and emotion, that kind of thing. And so, yeah, we really want to bring that to a voice assistant as well. And actually, if you think about it, there's us and then there's Jibo. And, Jibo is like 8 times more expensive. It's great. It's really cool product, but it's, there's a big divide there.
Well, and I wouldn't count Jibo out. I would be very surprised if Jibo didn't ship a speaker very similar to the Mark II at some point in the near future. It's great that their technology moves. And I've seen their unboxing videos and some of the use cases for that technology, and it's fantastic. That team in Boston is just killing it. But our advantage in this, in what we bring to the table for our customers and our users, is the ability to customize all of that, and eventually to customize it in communities. And so, me and 5 other people might team up to build a Mycroft persona that is into goth music and depressing, and all answers are super depressing, like sad Eeyore Mycroft, right?
God is totally taking you on that effort.
Yeah, and that personality may become super popular with a certain with a certain section of users that are 14 to 16 and live in suburbia, right? But people can make new personalities that really reflect them, and then change those personalities over time. The use case for this technology isn't just sitting on your counter and listening to music. The use case for this technology is a voice assistant that lives in your automobile. The use case for this technology is every call center job globally. Right? The use case for this technology is point of sale systems. The use case for this technology is, reception desks at companies, navigation kiosks at trade shows. I mean, there's just so many places that this technology can be used, and so many different personalities it can have, that, the type of approach we're taking really gives the community the flexibility to use the technology however they want, which is what we wanted to do in the first place. We just wanted to build Jarvis from Iron Man, man. If we'd have been able to download it and run it, we'd have been done. I've been like, okay, like I can move on, right?
Cool. That's really good, because one of the things that I quite like about the both Mark 1 and Mark 2 is, we've kind of touched on it briefly, is the kind of the look of it and design of it. Like the Echoes and the Google Homes, and even now the Apple HomePod, they've all kind of gone for a very similar kind of look, haven't they? Something that would just blend in on your shelf, whereas the Mycroft smart speaker, the Mark 1 and the Mark 2, looks a lot kind of cooler and funkier, doesn't it?
That's totally Derek.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is why be afraid to do that and to approach it in that way? And with the customizability of the faces, like we talked about earlier, yeah, we can, you want a really like emotional, more realistic looking face. Maybe there's a region that is interested in that, and we can do it. And then if that doesn't sell well somewhere else, then change it. So that kind of approach is basically us in a nutshell, like Josh has been talking about, being able to serve a lot of different communities, whereas we really don't think the other players are really that interested in that, or at least not that like right now. So.
Well, and the other players have taken a very safe approach. I'm been reading about the launch of the iMac, and when the iMac launched with the clear outer case and the handle in the top of it, and this new and funky shape that was just very, very different from the computers of the day, everybody looked at it and said, that is so radically different. Like, I don't know if it's going to sell. And of course, they sold 800,000 units in the first year. It became Apple's best-selling computer ever. And it's because John Ives and the team at Apple really took some significant risk in the design aspects and made something that was unique. And in our case, maybe it will become something that's iconic. Go and scoop up that Mark 1. Maybe it'll be worth what an Apple One is worth someday.
So you mentioned that this potential for this technology is obviously huge. I think you said every call center in the world essentially could be affected by this, which is true. I mean, given all of those varying use cases and given that kind of vision, what are some of the kind of challenges that either you're experiencing now or that you can envisage experiencing in the future to get to that point where the technology can handle all of those different use cases and be applied in all of those different environments?
Sure. So there are a couple of business challenges to that. One is because we're building such a broad platform that can run everywhere, finding an industry to focus on is very difficult because we have incoming from consumer product companies, we have incoming from automotive companies, we have incoming from trade shows. There's just this really wide variety of industries, and building a product that services all of them while simultaneously keeping revenue up can be a very significant challenge for a small team. In terms of technical challenges, I'll pass that over to Steve, who's been solving a lot of them on his own, but I'm sure has a long list of things that still need to be done.
Yeah, well, it's kind of the flip side of what Josh just described. On the technical side, there's all sorts of interest in different niche technologies like user identification, all based off of voice, or wanting to use this stack to build a chatbot framework, which is completely voiceless, but also allows you to tack in the voice interaction. There's just, every day we've got different people coming out with different ideas and different things that they're wanting to incorporate into it, and they're all great ideas. The biggest challenge is how do you incorporate all of these different things into the same platform without, changing the design in such a way that you're cutting out other possibilities, and that the rest of the world needs, not just this one niche that thinks it would be great if it could do this one particular thing just right. And so that's always tricky, and building out those interfaces in a way where you can evolve them later into things that you didn't even think about at the time you created the interface. That's what I'm trying to focus on, is allowing us to have flexibility to develop in new ways as we move forward.
I'd love to hear a little bit about what Dustin thinks of the limitations that his community is running into in Google and Amazon, and how maybe either they can address them or how we can address them going forward. I know that there have been some challenges, and I'd love to hear how we can, if we can provide services for those folks, how we can do it.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think you've addressed a lot of it already, right? In the Amazon Alexa community Slack, once a week, maybe once every 2 days, someone comes in and says, how do I do this? How do I set alarms in my skill? How do I make calls in my skill? How do I do X in my skill? And the answer is always, Amazon doesn't allow you to do that. So there's certainly that you're addressing already. But another really big thing that everyone is clamoring for is monetization, right? If we're going to put in the effort to build skills, if we're going to put in the effort to build something that's useful for these devices, people need to see an ROI at some point. The hobbyist can only take it so far. And so what are you guys doing to address that?
Sure. So from the monetization perspective, anybody who builds skills is welcome to monetize however they choose. And so if you want to build a specialty skill that plays a game, you're completely free to have the users create an account with you, and when they install the skill, they would simply enter their, either authenticate it through OAuth, which Uke has working as of a couple weeks ago, or store their username and password at home.mycroft.ai and access your skill that way. And so you would be able to charge people directly for whatever service that you're providing. Eventually, we're giving very serious thought, and this is not an announcement, this is not for certain, this is just something we're giving some thought to, about underpinning Mycroft with a cryptocurrency, which would allow users to buy a token and then gradually grind that token down over time as they use paid APIs. So for example, we have a relationship with Wolfram Alpha where every time we run a query against Wolfram, we pay a fraction of a penny. Right now, we subsidize that by doing business with big corporate entities, but a subsidized business model probably isn't the best business model for long-term health. We've been given some thought to having users buy a token. A free token would come with your Mark II when you bought it, that over time would gradually shrink as you use paid APIs. And then using a chunk of that Fpga Fabric as a miner, so that if you're running an official Mycroft device, it keeps generating tokens and you never have to pay anything. But if you're running it on your desktop or on a Raspberry Pi or on something that you didn't buy from us, you would either have to set up your own mining rig or simply buy a token in order to pay those APIs. And building an ecosystem like that may very well create huge opportunities for people who are building skills that are very popular, because of course, the more people use your skill, the more revenue you generate, and we'd provided a good way to do that. In the meantime, if you build a really awesome skill, you're more than welcome to require users to create an account with you and authenticate it and charge them per API query.
Well, we seem to be kind of delving into the more kind of technical specifics. What I'll do is do the dev chops with Dustin, and we'll kind of carry on the train of thought down to down the kind of technical route. So I'll hand over to you, Dustin.
Dev chops with Dustin. Let's do this.
Great. So we'll jump into actually more of an architectural discussion on a decision you made. You know, JavaScript is becoming very popular, especially in the voice-first community, to build these skills. But for skills for Mycroft, it's in Python. Can you talk a little bit about the decision or how you made that decision?
Well, I think there's a more even fundamental difference in the way Mycroft is built out than just that language, and that sort of informed why Python became the underpinning language of this system. So when you look at the base design of the Google equipment or the Amazon equipment, basically that thing sitting there in your house is a microphone and a speaker, and that's it. And all it does is it connects you back to a cloud entity that is doing all of your actual processing, and everything happens on that cloud. All the computation, all the API interaction occurs at the cloud level, and then it sends something back down to play out your speaker. That's basically the way it's designed. And the Mycroft system really does everything possible locally, as local as possible. So from the beginning, you know, there is the interaction that occurs there. And then at the current moment, we do reach off device typically to be able to do the speech to text transcription. But once that is completed off of a cloud service, and in the future, that doesn't necessarily have to be even someone else's cloud, it could be your cloud, or on the right hardware, it could be on the local hardware. Once that transcription comes back, the rest of it occurs on the local hardware. The natural language processing, the intent matching, and then the actual execution of the skill. And because you're running on the local hardware, that exposes a ton of capability. You're able to interact with the physical hardware. You know, if you have GPIO type equipment that you're wanting to send electrical signals out to motors, or you're wanting to interact with other equipment within the local area, within your house's LAN, to be able to control lighting systems, or to be able to control a blender, or to be able to receive, you know, MQTT notifications coming off of IoT devices. That all can happen running on this local equipment and interact that way. And because of that, Python has a ton of libraries that are existent already to do, you know, basically everything. So that was a vibrant community that we really want to be able to take advantage of, things that weren't in any way voice related. We wanted those capabilities to be available to the users. And you know, JavaScript, excuse me, is really a web technology originally, and that's what its heart is about. And interacting with IoT devices is awkward. You have to do it through gateways and things like that, or interacting with an I/O port off of a GPIO from a Raspberry Pi. It's just not built into it like you can with Python.
Right. And what are some of the either challenges or even happy surprises that people discover when developing Mycroft skills, either people new to voice first or people coming from these other platforms?
I think the thing that a lot of developers get most excited about is just the power that's available to them once they, you know, if they have been working in the Lambda environment and you know, they're so boxed in certain ways, and they're like, wow, you mean I can actually do anything I want with this? And they can, you know, it's really almost scarily powerful what you're able to pull off inside of a Mycroft skill. So those are some of the cool things about it. And I think the other bits that for me as a developer is the things that come out of left field that are made available to you suddenly. So like a couple of guys have come in recently with they've been working on developing Node-RED, which is a visual programming language. So there's a Node-RED capability now where you can do your skill development in that style outside of doing raw Python coding. And those capabilities that being in an open community versus waiting for this other entity to feed you what the latest features are, you get these things that just crop up, and that's one of the cool things about Mycroft and the way we can develop.
Okay. And moving further down the stack a bit away from the skills, you have two different intent parsers. Can you talk a little bit about what purposes each of those serve and the future between those two?
Sure. So the two intent parsers is Adapt, which was the original one that we began with, which is more of a keyword-based entity. And then the second one that came about is called Bodacious, which is more an example-based mechanism. And they both have their own use cases and the times where it's easier to make use of one or the other. And to be honest, we're still sorting out exactly how we put the two together and how they play with each other, because they are significantly different. Excuse me. The Adapt system is useful for areas where you have a very specific set of phrases that you're wanting to control. Bodacious can be a little more valuable where you're working with a much more vague type of voice interaction, and then combining that with some of the other mechanisms that we've built in. We have a thing called Converse, which allows you to look at raw utterances before it even hits the intent parsing. So you're able to take the context of what's been going on recently. The recently involved skills get a crack at the utterances that are coming through the system before we even hit the intent parsing. So you can do completely free-form things based off of the stuff that the user has spoken, or you can allow it to fall through, and then it will be picked up by the base intent parsing system. So there's a lot of different capabilities and a lot of different ways that we're exposing to allow us to have this conversational agent. It's less of just a single command shot, more of a interactive interaction.
That's really amazing, and I think it speaks a lot to what you said earlier about just the raw power you have when developing skills for Mycroft. If you look at some of the other platforms, it is a little bit boxed in, and perhaps there's some benefits to it, but if you really want to build something that gets into that raw information, you're going to be fighting with it a little bit, where it sounds like you're putting that all out there for the developers to use.
That's what we're trying to do.
Dev Chops with Dustin.
Okay, thank you. That was Dev Chops with Dustin. And let's go to Derick for a sec. So obviously you've kind of been involved heavily in some of the all of the kind of design. I'm just wondering whether you've had or what kind of your experience has been in terms of the designing for the actual voice experiences themselves, as opposed to designing the kind of hardware. Have you had much experience in designing the whole voice experiences? And if so, what are sort of some of the the principles and practices that you've kind of developed in that respect?
Yeah, so one, as a design leader here, I think the biggest thing is to just be the advocate for the user, right? And so whether it's the industrial design or the VUX design or visual design for different things, that's the main role that we play here. And there's me and one other designer on staff, David, And so we have to balance all of those things. So maybe for a couple of weeks I'll be off doing industrial design, or we'll be doing some other aspect, or we were heavily involved in the video production with the Kickstarter. So we're kind of always juggling these things. But I'd say, about 9 months ago, a year ago, we really started to formalize a process for internal UX for designing the voice experience. And it's, like I mentioned earlier, 2018 will be a big year for us to get a really documented process out there to share, but I can kind of run you through how we're doing it now. And,
Yeah, that'd be cool, if you could, yeah.
Sure. So it starts with user research, and we did a lot of that when we started with Mark II, just interviewing people in our community and interviewing voice assistant users in general, competitors as well. We do surveys as well, and getting that information to see, okay, what's missing out there in terms of skills, or how we're doing things correctly, and how can we improve upon that. And then, from there, we kind of developed these user personas of who our users are. And I kind of mentioned earlier that there were a lot, at the beginning, there's a lot of Joshes, right? So, but as we move forward, it's going to be basically everybody, right? So that persona, what we have now with Mark I being, in a lot of cases, kind of this robotic, partially because of our text-to-speech engine, and also partially because of some of the way the skills were written. They might even sound kind of Yoda-like in some ways, because they're pulling the information from how the API works, et cetera. That's just a lot more forgiving when you're the developer and you're writing a skill and you're so invested in the ability to do what you want with it that you're going to forgive some of the rough around the edges stuff. But as we move forward, that kind of forgiveness is going to go away. The next step for us is to get to that level. So I kind of got a little off track there. But so after user research, what we do is we kind of sit down and we're starting to use the jobs to be done framework, if you're familiar with that. And the beauty with that is that you're really trying to just boil it down to what exactly are you trying to do here. And in a lot of the cases, those things don't change, right? So music is this great example of what voice assistants are really good at, and it's kind of the selling feature for a lot of them. And if you look back at the history of that technology, the job to be done there, basically break it down into a situation, motivation, and outcome. Might be, I'm at home and I want to relax so I can unwind, and that might be playing music. And if you would go back to the record player, that would mean going and get that record off the shelf and then pulling out a sleeve, putting it on the record player, dropping the needle. It's this whole ritual, right? And we basically boiling down that same job to, hey, Mycroft, play music. It's just so elegantly simple. So starting with just trying to get the idea, okay, maybe you're writing a skill, getting it down to those jobs to be done, and not thinking, from the feature first, like, okay, well, if you're thinking like, all right, well, I need to say stop. If that's the first thing you're thinking, then that's bad. Like, you want to try and think from the big high picture stuff and work your way down. So jobs to be done first, and then we start with dialogue sketches, which are basically, that's just like really mini scripts of how you would interact with Mycroft. And out of that, if you do those really thoroughly, the jobs will be done, the scripts, you're going to get the intents. You're going to get the intents that then become basically the features of that skill. So that could be, like I was talking earlier, that an intent for stop for a media skill, or intent for play, or intent for specifying what song you want to play. And once you have all that, right now, we're actually that's when we start to bring dev in. And, there's other tools out there, like a lot of more complicated skills might need like a flow chart or flow to kind of diagram out your multiple states and things like that. So you kind of keep track of that. And that's really a lot more helpful in conversational interfaces. So like when you start to have these long conversations and stuff, and we've dabbled around with that. And there are like some really excellent tools out there that are starting to crop up for these specific VUX, problems. We're honestly doing most of it just in Office tools right now, but But it's really going to be interesting to see how those suites of tools build out to allow you to do those types of things, specifically for voice. So that's going to be something we're really going to need to go back and look at. How do we get that into our workflow a little bit better? Mostly because right now we have some conversational aspects, but it's usually kind of like a disambiguation thing where, like, you know, you need to ask, oh, AM, you're setting a time for an alarm, and you forgot to say AM or PM, you know, and then a little follow up on that. But in the future, I mean, we're going to have, hopefully, you know, as Josh mentioned, we want to be able to be like a real conversation, which, to be honest, where voice assistants are right now isn't a real conversation, because, you know, it's very much this, I have to say something, then I have to wait, and, you know, I can't interrupt Mycroft while I say anything, because, you know, he doesn't really know what that is exactly right now. And whereas, you know, I could interrupt, you know, Steve in a conversation, and that's, you know, might be kind of rude, but it's a very natural process of interacting with other people. So right now it's kind of very limited in a way, but as we get to that real conversational aspect, you know, getting the tools necessary to kind of mock that up and
part of that. And part of the process is moving away from scripted dialogue and scripted trees and moving towards machine learning approach. So one of the things Persona does is ingest big, huge blocks of conversation and feed it into a machine learning algorithm to provide you with answers. And using that tool, you know, Steve has a really good example of, I think it's related to music, Steve, that Michael developed, where it was able to generalize answers based on previous answers that people had given. And I don't remember exactly what it was. Could you run us through it?
Yeah, it was, and I'm going to see if I can remember exactly. It had a couple of different answers that the engine was fed with regards to, you know, do you like music? And the explicit answer was, I like music. I enjoy the rhythmic aspects of it. And then there's another one. Do you like Beethoven? Yes, I like Beethoven. I enjoy his music. So then when you ask the engine, you know, what do you like about Beethoven? It was able to connect the dots together between those two answers to say, I really enjoy the rhythmic aspects of Beethoven's music. And it was one of those cool things where it didn't explicitly in any of the answers tie Beethoven and rhythmic. But the fact that you've been talking about music and music like this, the engine figured out that if it likes Beethoven, then it must be because Beethoven has that sort of quality to it. And that's the answer that it gave back.
And so by capturing tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of answers through Persona and through interactions with users, the goal is to train the machine learning algorithm to respond to these questions by basically interpolating or by using the neural network to generalize, which is where you start getting towards the outer edges of what current AI technologies are capable of. You know, in many ways, when we talk about voice assistants today, we're effectively talking about voice command systems. And where we're looking to do really cutting edge stuff and move the ball forward on the technology side is creating intelligence stacks that are able to generalize and answer questions based on large data sets, the same way that you and I can answer questions based on large data sets.
How that's obviously a mammoth task, and there's a mixture in there of, it sounds as though there's obviously a huge mixture of design and development in that, because you need to design for those scenarios in terms of all those different situations. And, you know, I think, Derek, you called it their jobs to be done. I can imagine that, you know, if you're kind of building an AI that can cater for all of these different use cases, you kind of need to at least have a starting point of use cases kind of thing. So how with the Mycroft platform, how does the sort of design side and the development side work together? So for example, if Derek, if you were kind of building a voice app or skill or experience that you identified a real use case for machine learning, how would you kind of how do you marry the design and the developer side together?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's all still kind of sorting itself out. We have some of the machine learning initiatives like Persona we were talking about earlier. I think maybe that's a good example of how we're going to kind of, dovetail the dev and design together and use that tool moving forward. So, initially from kind of like a traditional standpoint, I think this is awesome. Will make Mycroft different than other voice assistants out there. They would have, for a personality, they would write, thousands of responses. They'll bring in voice talent and they'll record all these prompts and all this stuff. We don't really have the resources to do that. But what we do have the resources to do is that we have the resources to do machine learning and AI and these really smart people. So we're tackling it from like a different angle, which we think is really how it's going to be done in the future. And the problem with that is, it's a lot easier for a designer to wrap your head around writing all these scripts that are, responses that are going to pop up for a certain situation, and kind of relinquish control to a machine learning thing that is kind of contributed by the community is like, whoa, hold on, what's going to come out of this thing, right? But really, that's the way we have to think about it here, and that's our value as an open source and an AI kind of driven company, is to look at creative solutions that these other voice assistants were able to maybe tackle with kind of brute force or just throwing money at the problem. And so Persona, for me, it's kind of turned into this thing. Okay, well, it has this personality aspect that we did write a lot of the personality for Mycroft that we were able to catch. It's that Persona can catch things that we didn't think of, right? But it also is picking up intents that are just failing to match, and then so we're like, okay, how do we get those tagged correctly so that we can go back and match them to the correct skills, or if there's no skill there, how we can write a skill to capture that intent. So that kind of feedback mechanism, and I'm not sure how some of the other players are doing it, but that kind of feedback mechanism is just, it's going to be awesome for us to be able to continue to make the product better.
Yeah, and one of the things I want to kick in is, again, the reason that we exist, honestly, as a competitor to an organization like Google or an organization like Amazon, which has near infinite cache resources, is that we're doing this as a collaborative effort, a community-based effort. So the things that he was just talking about, we're building our tools around the ideas of being able to work together. The persona tagging is something that anyone's going to be able to come in and look at a question that someone in the world asked a Mycroft unit, and they had to opt in and all this, accept it in there, so that where they were allowing this to be shared. And so this question was asked of, that wasn't handled by the system. One individual then, and it may not be us, and it almost certainly won't be us, can propose an answer. And then two more individuals will have to come along and say, that's a pretty good answer. I like what they came up with, and give an approval, or reject that, and it goes back in the bin for someone else to pick up and to come up with that answer that is appropriate for the question. And that's that kind of mechanism, and the allowing people who have all sorts of different backgrounds to be able to tackle things is the only way that we're going to be able to take this on as a company or as an organization or as an effort. And honestly, I think it's the best way to solve it, globally anyway. I think a single entity is never going to be able to represent the entirety of the world. It's the only thing that's, it has a viewpoint. Whatever that entity, that individual, that organization, that corporation has a viewpoint that they're biased toward. And we're building these technologies. I think we're all been pretty influenced by sci-fi. The computer on Star Trek, or name the sci-fi movie for the last 30 years. There's some sort of voice interface that you've been interacted with, and it's always super easy and natural, and that's what we want to build. And we're going to have to do that as a group, not as a single entity that produces that.
Yeah. I would argue that it didn't always go well in sci-fi. The user experience with HAL was a bit of a challenge. The pod bay doors and everything.
Worked pretty good in Men in Black 2, though. I don't know if
there
you've
you go.
seen. Yeah, he just he's. I watched that the other day. He's driving in his car and he says, "Computer, show me the Men in Black headquarters," and it just comes up on the screen. And he's got like all the CCTV cameras and stuff like that. And I was just thinking, but obviously thinking about this sort of chat and all that lot. I was just sitting there thinking, oh, that could be Mycroft. That.
From the design point, it's much more like, okay, we don't have really the resources internally to say, okay, this is exactly how all this stuff's going to work. We're going to plan it all ahead of time. So mostly it's trying to get the tools out there for everybody to be kind of thinking about it from that side and having the user advocacy in their mind, both internally and in our community, so that we don't become a bottleneck, that like these really, these really creative solutions like we've been talking about are going to pop up from both internally at Mycroft and in the community.
Cool. That sounds like the whole Mycroft the platform and the hardware and everything about it sounds really, really exciting. And you're obviously we've touched on it kind of throughout the whole course of this show in terms of the other efforts from the other companies and how seemingly kind of locked down it all is. And I think what you're trying to do is absolutely fantastic. You know what I mean? It's getting a whole community involved in it and having something that is entirely open and entirely flexible, with also the hardware to go with it. That's it's something that you kind of wouldn't expect really. You would kind of think that it would either be the software or the hardware, whereas you've kind of combined the two and you've got the whole kind of community thing going, and it sounds absolutely fantastic. So thank you everybody for joining us. Before we kind of head off and wrap up, can you tell us a little bit more about what 2018 has in store for Mycroft?
Yeah, sure. We're wrapping up our Kickstarter now. We'll be on Indiegogo for another 45 days. We have brand new voices available. Actually, if you can sample them here. If you'd like, you can head to our website and see some of the examples laying the new voices next to the voice from Google and Amazon. Those are deploying in April. We're moving to the deep speech transcription engine in March. And we're doing a lot of work around user experience. The Mark II ships December 4th at 5 p.m. And so we're really excited to be working towards that shipping date. And then we're going to make a big push into international languages in the second half of this year, focusing on languages that the other players might not be interested in providing support for. So things like Hawaiian and Icelandic and Afrikaner, languages that are very important to the people who speak them, but are currently not supported by voice assistants. And so that's going to be a big part of the year as well.
Fantastic. And how can somebody get started if they're a developer wanting to give Mycroft a go and have a stab at the platform? How would they get up and running? How would they get started? Where would they go to get started?
Head to Mycroft AI and hit Get Mycroft. You can pull down a Raspberry Pi image and be up and running in 15 minutes.
Fantastic. And where can people get in touch with? We'll start with you, Joshua. If somebody wanted to hit you up online or find out more about yourself, where can people find you?
Sure. People can always find me on the Mycroft forums at community.mycroft.ai or reach out to me through the chat. I'm Joshua-Mycroft on our Mattermost chat channel. And I'm always happy to speak to members of the community and engage with them and listen to their ideas and really grow the group of people that is working to make this successful.
Fantastic. What about you, Steve?
Yeah, most of my life is spent on the chat.mycroft.ai, the Mattermost forums. That's the best way to get hold of me. You can always send me emails, steve.penrod@mycroft.ai. And I do occasionally go over to the community forums, but I'm usually swamped and only look at those when somebody points something out specifically. So the best way to track me down is probably on the chat.
What about you, Derek?
Yeah, I'm going to echo that. Chat, good. You can email me as well at derek.schweppe@mycroft.ai. But yeah, chat's always great.
Cool, fantastic. What about you, Dustin?
Yeah, you can hit me up on Twitter at dcoats or send me an email over at dustin@dcoats.com.
Fantastic. Nice one. There you go. That was Mycroft. That was an intense episode. That was a fantastic episode. I can't believe, how interesting that was. All the guys there are mega passionate about it. You can tell just by the tone of voice and the way they're explaining things. It's something that is not only a really really good business idea and a really good platform. It's something that they're really madly passionate about as well, which is fantastic. Do check it out. I'll put all of the links and all of the things that we've been discussing all through the show. It's been a long one actually, and I think I've just been saying to them at the end there that I could have just spoke about this with them for absolutely weeks, because it's just such an interesting platform and company. So thanks to Mycroft for joining us. Thanks to Josh, Steve, and Derek, and thanks for Justin as well for joining us and co-hosting and for doing Dev Chops with Dustin. And thank you all for listening. And until next time, see you later.